Coins jingle in coat pockets, ration books fade into memory, shop windows gleam with post-war promise. Britain in 1955 was hopeful, thrifty, quietly proud. A crisp green pound note could stretch astonishingly far. A week's groceries, a seaside outing, even a new pair of shoes. Housewives counted every shilling. Children pressed noses to sweet shop glass. Men in flat caps traded coins for laughter and pints. Life was modest, but full. So what could £1 really buy in 1955? A week's worth of groceries for a family of 4. The rustle of paper bags and the clink of glass bottles meant the week had begun. In 1955, a single pound note could fill a family's pantry of bread, butter, milk, tea, potatoes, a cut of meat, and even a little sugar for puddings. Mothers stretched every coin with quiet genius, turning simplicity into comfort. The grocer knew each name, scales tipped with trust, and every ounce mattered. There were no overflowing aisles or plastic packaging, just shelves of necessity and care. Meals were modest, but they filled more than stomachs. They filled homes with warmth, gratitude, and pride. Today, £1 barely buys a loaf, but once it could buy a week of dignity. Would your family have stretched it wisely or spent it all in one go? A full English breakfast every morning for a week. Morning sunlight slipped through lace curtains, catching the gleam of a frying pan already at work. In 1955, a single pound note could serve a full English breakfast every morning for an entire week. Bacon crisping, eggs sizzling, beans simmering beside golden toast. Families gathered as the smell drifted through narrow hallways, the radio humming softly in the corner. It wasn't indulgence, it was normal life, hearty, comforting, and shared. Each plate was a quiet celebration of recovery, proof that Britain was finding warmth again after years of austerity. Today, that same meal would cost more than a day's wage once did. But back then, the hiss of bacon and the scrape of forks meant something simple and beautiful, that life was good and the nation was healing. A cinema date for 2, tickets, toffees, and tea. Neon lights flickered through the drizzle, and laughter echoed beneath glowing marquees. In 1955, one crisp pound could buy an evening of escape. 2 cinema tickets, a box of toffees, and tea in a cosy cafe after the credits rolled. Couples strolled arm in arm through misty streets, pockets light but hearts full. The scent of buttered popcorn and perfume mingled in the air, as the silver screen promised worlds far beyond the high street. For a few hours, everyday worries disappeared, replaced by music, glamour, and whispered goodnights. Today, a pound might not even buy the popcorn alone, but once it bought something far rarer, a moment of wonder and the feeling that the world was opening up again. A pair of leather shoes from the high street. In 1955, a crisp £1 note could walk you straight into a shop on the high street and out again with a fine pair of leather shoes, sturdy, polished, and made to last. Cobblers took pride in every stitch, shaping real hide that softened perfectly with time. Shoes weren't fashion, they were foundations, built to endure rain, work, and daily miles. You might even have a few shillings left for polish and a brush. Today, that same coin wouldn't buy a single lace. But back then, a pound could still buy craftsmanship, honesty, and things that grew better with wear. A quiet kind of luxury that has almost vanished. A new wool jumper knitted in Britain. Step into a post-war British shop in 1955 and the scent of fresh wool greets you. Soft, clean, and proudly local. For £1 you could buy a beautifully knitted jumper, spun and stitched here in Britain. No synthetics, no shortcuts, just pure warmth from the fleece of hardy sheep grazing on green hillsides. Each jumper told a story of patience and pride. Mothers bought them for sons heading to work or daughters off to school, knowing they'd last through winters to come. The wool itched a little, but it was honest, a reminder that comfort once came with character. Today, that same son might buy a coffee and a sandwich, but back then it brought quality, care, and the quiet pride of something made to endure. A full tank of petrol for your Morris Minor. Picture the open road in 1955, hedgerows gliding past. The hum of a Morris Minor carrying you toward the coast. For a single £1, you could fill the entire tank. Petrol cost just a few shillings a gallon, and a drive from London to Brighton felt like freedom itself. At filling stations, attendants in pressed uniforms would pump your fuel, wipe your windscreen, and chat about the weather as you planned your weekend by the sea. The roads were gentler then, slower, quieter, lined with patience. Today, £1 might not even move the needle, but once it brought the promise of open skies, salt air, and the simple thrill of the journey ahead. A round of drinks for all your mates at the pub. In 1955, a single £1 could make you the hero of the evening. Pints of bitter, glasses of sherry, maybe even a stout, enough for everyone at your local. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and laughter. The carpet soft beneath scuffed shoes, the jukebox humming somewhere in the corner. £1 could buy joy, camaraderie, and stories that lasted long after closing time. The bartender knew your name, and the clink of coins on the counter carried its own kind of music. Today, that same pound might barely buy a sip, but back then it bought belonging, and the feeling that life, however modest, was rich in all the right ways. A train ticket from London to Brighton, return. Steam hissed, wheels clattered, and the scent of coal and leather filled the station. In 1955, a single pound could take you from London to Brighton and back again. A full day of seaside adventure. Families clutched paper tickets, children pressed noses to fogged windows, and couples held hands as the countryside rolled by. The journey itself was part of the joy, the rhythmic sway of the carriage, the chatter of strangers, the promise of salt air and fish and chips at journey's end. For a pound, you could trade city smoke for sea breeze, noise for laughter, and a day's work for a day's wonder. It wasn't just travel, it was freedom, the kind that money can't quite buy anymore. A freshly tailored suit from the local draper. In 1955, stepping into a draper's shop was stepping into a world of care and precision. For a single pound, you could reserve fine fabric, have it measured, and take home a suit cut perfectly to your surtim, sleeves just so, trousers brushing neatly over polished shoes. The scent of wool and polish filled the air. Scissors clicked in rhythm, and there the tailor's chalk marked every promise of pride. A suit wasn't fashion, it was a statement of effort, respect, and belonging. Fathers and sons wore them like armour for honest work and quiet ambition. Today, a pound wouldn't buy the thread, but once it bought confidence, hand-stitched, measured, and made to last. A week's rent for a small flat in Manchester. Step through a narrow doorway in 1955 Manchester, and a single pound could pay the rent for a modest flat, a tiny haven above the noise of the city, or tucked away in a quiet terrace. The rooms were small, the ceilings low, but every inch carried warmth. A kettle steaming on the stove, light spilling across worn floorboards, coal smoke curling gently through the air. Families made every space count. Neighbours shared sugar, children played in the streets, and life, though humble, felt full. A pound bought more than shelter. It bought security, dignity, and the comfort of calling somewhere your own. Today it wouldn't cover the light bill, but once it could still buy a home. A family fish and chip supper every night for a week. The paper crinkled, the smell of salt and frying oil filled the air, and the clatter of plates echoed through the kitchen. In 1955, a single pound could buy a week's worth of fish and chips for a family, golden, crispy, and steaming hot, wrapped in brown paper straight from the shop. Children tore eagerly into the flaky fish while parents drizzled vinegar over thick chips, savouring the simple joy of a hot meal after a long day. It wasn't just dinner, it was comfort, tradition, and a small luxury that brightened the week. Evenings were filled with chatter, laughter, and the familiar scent of salt and newspaper ink. Today, a pound might not cover a single portion, but once it brought warmth, togetherness, and the taste of happiness itself. A dozen pints of milk delivered to your door. Morning light caught the frosted windows, and the jingle of the milk float announced the start of another day. In 1955, £1 could buy 12 pints of fresh milk, delivered straight to your doorstep by the friendly milkman who knew every family by name. Glass bottles clinked softly in wire carriers as children reached for the creamy top, and mothers tucked the rest safely into the pantry. Milk wasn't just a drink, it was the heart of breakfasts, puddings, and endless cups of tea. The daily delivery brought rhythm and reassurance, a quiet bond between homes and the people who kept them running. Today, doorstep deliveries are rare, but the memory of that morning ritual, gentle, dependable, human, still lingers. A month's worth of coal for the fireplace. Winter mornings, and in 1955, Britain carried a distinct scent, smoke curling from chimneys, frost on window panes, and the steady warmth of a coal fire. For just £1, families could buy enough coal to keep a fireplace roaring for an entire month. Heaps of black lumps promised comfort for kitchens and living rooms alike, driving out the chill of long, grey days. Children watched the flames dance while parents stirred kettles and soups, the fire's glow marking both safety and home. Coal wasn't just fuel, it was the heartbeat of domestic life, the centre around which families gathered and time seemed to slow. Today a pound wouldn't buy a handful of kindling, but once it brought warmth, stability, and the sound of crackling firelight against the cold. A family trip to the seaside, ice creams included. The salty breeze carried the cries of gulls, sand sifted through small fingers, and the rhythmic crash of waves filled the air. In 1955, a single pound could send a family to the seaside for the day. Bus fare, a paddle in the surf, and ice creams all around. Children raced along the promenade, pockets sticky with coins and fingers sticky with sugar, while parents rested on weathered benches watching the horizon in quiet peace. It was simple, joyful and affordable, a day that felt like freedom itself. Today, £1 might not buy the cone alone, but once it brought the sound of laughter against the wind and memories that lasted far longer than the tide. A haircut and shave at the local barber. The door chimed as you stepped into the barber's shop. Leather chairs creaked under familiar weight. The smell of talc and aftershave hung in the air, and scissors snipped in steady rhythm. In 1955, a single £1 covered a tidy haircut and a close shave, a small act that left men feeling sharp, clean, and quietly confident. Stories were shared, jokes exchanged, and every face left the mirror with a touch of pride. It wasn't just grooming, it was ritual, routine, and community, a place where time slowed and conversation mattered. Today, that same £1 might buy a comb, but back then it bought belonging. A record player needle and the latest 78 RPM single. The crackle of the gramophone filled the room as a fresh 78 RPM record spun beneath the needle. In 1955, a single £1 could buy a new stylus and the week's most popular song Zorstim, bringing the sound of modern Britain into every living room. The scent of polished wood and warm valves mingled with excitement as families gathered to listen. Children swayed, parents smiled, and for a few minutes the world felt lighter, brighter, full of promise. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was the heartbeat of the home, connection, comfort and joy pressed into grooves of shellac. Today that same coin wouldn't buy a download, but once it bought harmony. Sunday roast with dessert at a cafe. The clatter of cutlery, the scent of roasting meat and the murmur of families filled the cafe. In 1955, a single £1 could buy a full Sunday roast, tender slices of beef, crisp vegetables, rich gravy, followed by a sweet pudding to finish. Children peered over plates of steam while parents savoured a meal they hadn't had to cook, relishing the rare comfort of being served. It was simple indulgence, a ritual of rest after a week of work, warmth shared across tables polished by time. Today, £1 might not buy the dessert alone, but once it brought the taste of togetherness and the quiet joy of a Sunday well spent. A pair of nylon stockings, a true luxury then. In 1955, a single £1 could buy a pair of nylon stockings, and sleek, delicate, and shimmering with promise. Women treasured them, folding the fabric carefully after use, or saving them for dances, dates, and Sundays best spent. They slipped smoothly over legs, held by garters or elastic, turning an ordinary outfit into something graceful. Stockings weren't merely clothing, they were confidence, a small luxury after years of thrift. Children watched their mothers dress with fascination, sensing the pride stitched into every thread. Today, £1 would barely buy a button, but once it bought elegance, quiet, feminine, and proudly earned. A school uniform set, shirt, tie and cap. In 1955, a single £1 could outfit a child for school. A crisp white shirt, a neatly knotted tie, and a smart cap perched just so. Each piece was made to endure playground scrapes and rainy walks, stitched with care by hands that understood longevity. Mothers adjusted collars and hems with quiet precision, while children admired their reflections, eager for the first day back. Uniforms weren't just garments, they were symbols of belonging, routine, and the promise of education. £1 could buy pride, discipline, and a sense of place in a changing world. Today, that same sum wouldn't cover a button, but once it dressed a generation for the future. A week's worth of bus rides to work. In 1955, a single £1 could cover an entire week of bus fares, carrying workers through the bustling streets of Britain from Monday to Friday. The scent of coal smoke and damp leather lingered as red buses rattled over cobbled roads, passengers jostling gently and nodding to familiar faces. Factory hands, clerks, and shop assistants counted coins carefully, but £1 stretched far enough to guarantee the daily journey without worry. Each ride was a small portrait of life, shared glances, snippets of conversation, and the steady rhythm of wheels humming over tramlines. It was movement, community, and routine bound together by a single coin. Today, £1 might not take you a single stop, but once, it carried a nation to work and back day after day with quiet reliability. A dozen fresh eggs and a pound of butter. Morning light glowed across tiled kitchens as baskets held 12 fresh eggs beside a block of golden butter. In 1955, a single £1 could buy both, enough to bake, fry, and create simple meals that warmed every corner of the home. Children watched as yolks broke into sizzling pans, steam curling into sunlight, while parents measured with care, stretching ingredients with practiced grace. It was nourishment and comfort in equal measure, a daily ritual that turned thrift into abundance. Today, a pound might buy a single egg, but once, it filled kitchens with the smell of breakfast, the promise of tea-time cakes, and the quiet satisfaction of providing well. A box of Cadbury's chocolates for someone special. The ribbon was tied just so, the glossy box promising sweetness within. In 1955, a single pound could buy a box of Cadbury's chocolates, soft-scented, caramel-filled, or smooth and milky, each one a tiny celebration. Children waited eagerly as adults lifted the lid, the air sweet with cocoa and expectation. Sometimes it was shared after Sunday dinner, sometimes it was a gift, a gesture of care that said more than words could. Chocolate wasn't just indulgence, it was affection, gratitude, and thoughtfulness wrapped in gold foil. Today, a pound might not buy even a single bar, but once it bought happiness in a box. A pound of loose tea and a tin of biscuits, steam curled from the kettle as the scent of fresh tea leaves filled the kitchen. In 1955, a single pound could buy a pound of loose tea and a tin of crisp biscuits, enough to sustain a week of tea-time rituals. Mothers measured each spoonful carefully, pouring boiling water over the leaves while biscuits waited patiently on the side, golden and crumbly. Children peeked over the table, eager for a dunk, while fathers savoured the quiet pause between work and rest. It wasn't just a drink or a snack, it was comfort in a cup, a ritual that united generations and soothed weary days. Today, that same pound might barely buy a tea bag, but once it brewed warmth, company, and conversation. A weekly newspaper subscription delivered daily. The morning hush was broken by the soft thud of newspapers landing on the doorstep. In 1955, a single pound could cover a week's subscription. News, stories, and comic strips delivered fresh each day. Families gathered around the breakfast table, pages rustling as they shared headlines, laughter, and opinions. Children traced cartoons with sticky fingers, while parents read about politics, markets, and the wider world beyond their street. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was a thread connecting homes, shaping thought and conversation across the nation. Today, a pound might not buy a single page, but once it brought the world to your door. A day trip to the countryside with picnic supplies. Sunlight filtered through leafy branches as families set out, baskets in hand, ready for a day in the countryside. In 1955, a single pound could buy everything for a picnic: sandwiches, fruit, a bottle of lemonade, and a few sweet treats tucked in paper wraps. Children ran ahead along winding paths, laughter echoing through open fields, while parents spread blankets and unpacked the feast. It wasn't just food or fresh air, it was freedom, togetherness, and the feeling that life's best moments cost very little. A pound could carry a family into nature and return them home with hearts full and spirits high, memories that lingered long after the sun went down. 1 pound, a lifetime ago. Yet its echoes still shape the way we live, love, and remember. Keep exploring the world that built the Britain we know today.